Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Thursday, January 21st, 2021. There's a hashtag that was trending on Twitter today. Biden erased women. Amusingly, I suppose Twitter can't let these from the ground up expressions of popular opinion simply exist for several hours whenever I attempted to type in the hashtag Biden erased women. Twitter would automatically attempt to complete that to Biden erased men. Because again, Biden erased women is wrong think. Abigail Shrier, who is the author of Irreversible Damage, the Transgender Craze, Seducing Our Daughters, which I have reviewed and which I highly recommend. It is an American horror story that turns out to be true. She tweeted 18 hours ago on day one, Biden unilaterally eviscerates women's sports. Any educational institution that receives federal funding must admit biologically male athletes to women's teams, women's scholarships, etc. A new glass ceiling was just placed over girls. Now, I don't really care all that much about women's sports. I remember the coach on King of the Hill saying, Title IX, Dick Nixon's biggest mistake. And perhaps it was. Well, it's certainly on the list. But Biden, in appointing Rachel Levine to a high post, Assistant Secretary of Health or some such, and now with this executive order on preventing and combating discrimination, he is putting the trans agenda right at the top of his administration. And if you thought that the Democrats, having won the election, were going to move towards unity, shame on you. But that's not how the left works. The left stakes out a position which seems preposterous. They win that position, and then they say, okay, where are we going to move next? There is no stasis in political life. There is no stasis in life, full stop. But the right, particularly the conservatives, are too useless to understand this. Now, imagine, if you would, a mediocre male high school or college athlete who decides to transition so he can beat girls. Is that the saddest story in the world, or what? You think, oh, no, that doesn't happen. Well, the media for several years now has been heralding the braveness of these new women, who, of course, are wiping the floor with their biological female opponents. I suppose there is an upside to this, which is, I suspect, not very long from now, those mouthy lesbians on the U.S. women's soccer team will all be replaced by hulking men. So we have that to look forward to. But Biden goes, of course, farther than that. He always goes farther than that. Love is love, you see? Every person should be treated with respect and dignity and should be able to live without fear, no matter who they are or whom they love. Now, this sounds like boilerplate, and in a way that it is, but in another way, a more important way, it is not. Every person should be treated with respect and dignity and should be able to live without fear, no matter who they are or whom they love. That is a universal injunction. And those who support polygamy, pedophilia, incest, and bestiality are obviously smiling today. Oh, no, 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 no. He didn't mean that. Well, did he mean something more specific? If so, why didn't he say that? No matter who they are or whom they love. Love is love. Love conquers all. And so if this is true, if no kind of sexual orientation may be discriminated against, then why should not polygamy, pedophilia, incest, and bestiality be legalized? First legalized and then, of course, celebrated. Why not? Oh, no, 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 those things are horrible. Well, we used to be told that homosexuality was horrible. We used to be told that trans was not just horrible, but insane. And look where we are now with homosexuality in gruesome detail being taught to school children. Right beginning in kindergarten, with politicians, at least in my country, being forced to march in pride parades, with everyone walking on very scared feet around the topic of transsexuality. And this is how it works. Again, there is no stasis in life. And of course, we find out that the most hated people on earth now are those people called TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists. Remember the feminist movement? Remember how powerful it used to be? Well, consider how weak it is now. That a bunch of people who have just become women, although of course they claim they were misgendered at birth, show up and tell the feminists, we are in charge now. And the feminists say, okay, sounds good to us. Now, of course, the feminists had campaigned for decades for safe spaces for women. Now, I know a lot of people laugh at this. I'm not going to laugh at it because obviously there's a much different dynamic where you have a room full of women versus a mixed group. But these safe spaces no longer exist because members of the trans community have barged into them and made it clear that anyone who is uncomfortable with this can leave before they get their faces bashed in, because the anti-trans brigade seems to have a high amount of testosterone in it, and they threaten violence against these TERFs on a regular basis and commit acts of violence against them and feminist spaces which are considered not sufficiently gender affirming. But whenever I get into this subject on Twitter, I have all these trans people boring on at enormous lengths. They used to talk about endocrinology a lot, but you've noticed they have dropped that because endocrinology is a branch of science. It's simply enough to say, I may have been born a woman, but I've always identified as a man, and now I'm expressing myself as a man, or vice versa. That's all it takes. And similarly, with regard to schizophrenia, if you go back 20, 30, maybe even as recently as 10 years ago, that would be pushing it, you had a lot of people carrying on about brain chemistry. You notice no one talks about that with regard to schizophrenia anymore. Thomas Zaz wrote some decades ago that when he first heard this argument about brain chemistry, he decided, well, obviously the pathologist must be all over this. So he consulted all, Thomas Saz was a physician, of course, as well as a psychiatrist. So he went and looked at all the textbooks, and strangely, there was nothing about the brain chemistry of schizophrenics. Let's hear from Heron Greensmith, Esquire. Heron, Heron, Green, and with 3 E's, Smith. Somehow I doubt that is this person's given name. Heron Greensmith, Esquire, is a senior research analyst at PRA Eyes Right, adjunct professor at Boston University Law, analyses in Teen Vogue and Bitch Media. Is that what Teen Vogue and Bitch Media provide? Analyses? I don't think so. In any event, Heron wrote this morning, TERFs and transphobes are out in force today, and as of this week, it's only 8 a.m. on the East Coast. Before you get seduced into debating justice for trans people on the TERFs terms, let me remind us all that their terms are fundamentally wrong. Also follow and retweet actual trans people as well as cis people who support justice and thriving for trans people. Drown the bigots' voices in the voices of those with lived experience. The lived experiences of women, actual women, are completely irrelevant. The lived experiences of women who go through puberty, have periods, have uteruses, give birth to children. 100% of children at last count, then go through menopause. Their voices, their lived experience it's irrelevant. It is completely irrelevant. These people show up and yes, what you don't understand is, oh, I see. Well, apparently what I don't understand is that a bunch of people, hulking people with enormous jaws and noses and foreheads can show up with their deep voices and start telling women about the real experience of being a woman, what that is like. Someone called SOFFF, yes, I usually got identified as a useful idiot. This person says, oh yes, when trans people get basic human rights, it means that cisgender people no longer have them. That's exactly how it works. Yes, we used to have a group called women, but now we have 2 groups of women. We have cisgender women, boo, and we have trans women, yay, yay. Yes, and I see that the cat boys were after me on Twitter. I can't imagine why someone who would actually identify as a cat boy would be taken seriously by anyone. But once again, here we are. Here we are. Someone called The Upcake, gay artist, and do we know anything more about that person? I don't argue online, will block you, uses all pronouns, ACAB, abolish ICE, BLM, creator of Imagine That webtoon. Yeah, okay. Decided to lecture me as a cisgender woman, meaning I was born a woman, in case you didn't know. I can tell you that we don't all think the same things. We don't have a collective opinion on any given issue. Who cares what they think? Like literally a majority of this tag is women sharing what they think. And there is some Marvel well, I don't think it's Marvel, Pixel cartoon GIF. Shut the fuck up, please shut the fuck up. They go to that very quickly. That's pretty much the default. Yes, as a cisgender woman, meaning I was born a woman, in case you didn't know, and I asked this person, do you have a degree in actually studies? Because that's what they always go to. Well, actually, Yes, everything that you know is wrong. Everything that we have ever known is wrong. Yeah, as Abigail Schreier explains in her book, that there was a phenomenon, it still exists, not as popular as it was, of people, overwhelmingly women, starving themselves deliberately. And even as their weight had dropped to a dangerous level, they would stare in the mirror and comment on how disgusting they were. And some of them, Karen Carpenter being the most famous example, actually starved themselves to death. Now, it is not the case that advocates for this disease were allowed to explain to us, well, actually, these people are just expressing their true identity. They were born starving, you see. And the use of this word starvation, it's anorexic phobic. And instead, these people were taken to physicians who attempted, with some success, to persuade them that the decision that they had made was a very bad one indeed. Supporters of the trans terror, they like to talk about suicide a lot. But strangely enough, even these people who have transitioned of an exceedingly high rate, as self-reported as it were, of suicidal ideation. Something like 40% of them claim to have attempted to commit suicide, which suggests to me that transition is not an efficacious medical procedure. But Abigail Schreier says in her book that this is a craze, a public contagion, much like anorexia nervosa, much like the missing children hysteria or kidnapped children hysteria, much like the satanic panic of the 1980s and 1990s, and that it will eventually disappear. Well, here's hoping. How many hundreds of thousands or millions of increasingly now women, majority women, will have their lives wrecked by this before this panic burns itself out? Where are the conservatives on this, speaking out against this? Because it seems to me the only people who are brave enough to speak out about it, with few exceptions, are the aforementioned radical lesbians, the TERFs. And I must say that I have a great deal of admiration for their courage. Jim Smith, the Vagina Monologues, has stopped being performed. Yes, I had seen that. Yeah, because it's troublesome, the suggestion that having a vagina somehow means that one is a woman. Yes. I did a review of the Vagina Monologues some years ago, and I did some research into this, and I found out that in the earlier versions of the play, there was a rape depicted where I believe a 14-year-old girl was plied with alcohol by an adult woman. And at the end, the 14-year-old girl says, well, if it was a rape, it was a good rape. How about that, huh? How about that? Strange thing about the Vagina Monologues is that I went to see it, and I think the Orpheum Theater in Vancouver, which is an old vaudeville house. It seats around 3,000. The place was packed, and the crowd was overwhelmingly female. I saw some male homosexuals in the crowd, a few, but overwhelmingly female, and these were, it seemed to me, resolutely normal. I mean, I could see the way they were dressed. I could hear how they were talking, and I suppose it was put to them that, yes, this is what we're all about now. And so they bought into it. Was there any actress in Hollywood who did not take part in a reading of the Vagina Monologues? It's a pretty easy gig for an actor because typically they held the script up as they read. Not a lot of acting there. Hello to St. Augustine Bear, Professor Paul. Metal Mike says, I enjoy women's tennis, but imagine 1,000 Serenas invading that sport, and they will be male to boot. Adam, Mr. Grace, where can we listen to or read your commentary when you get banned? Well, I suppose I will get to that after that bridge has been burned. But I'm trying my very hardest not to be banned from this platform. Anran says, I don't watch women's tennis any longer. Are there any attractive ones these days? I mentioned just a couple of days ago, vis-a-vis the Australian Open, the number 28th ranked player in the world. Her name was Yulia something or other from Kazakhstan, a blonde woman, very attractive indeed. Metal Mike says maybe KMG could get a column on the Western Standard. Yeah, I don't know. I have a history with that outfit, particularly with two of the founders. So I don't think that's likely. Steve says trans exclusionary rational feminists. I like that. Sharapova still plays. She was never much good, actually. Don from Beyond says, Central Florida, I went to appointment at my regular dentist in neighboring county. That county has mask mandate, so they made me wait outside. I'll look for a new dentist in my own county. Is this the second story you've told about going to a different county and running into some COVID-19 hysteria? Shouldn't you stick to your own county? KMG, we are dealing with religious fanatics. Indeed, we are. There was a fatuous story by editorial, I suppose you could say, by Kelly McPartland in the National Post about Aaron O'Toole. And it was about how he hadn't gone far enough in ousting Derek Sloan. Not far enough. It is never far enough. And it's a very weird thing. He starts talking about God in this. The column is about identity politics, but he drags God into it here. I will read a little bit. That the question remains whether O'Toole really found God or is just praying and pretending. There are plenty of reasons for ejecting Sloan. His sins have been well documented. I guess the only sins that exist anymore are political sins. But you see that McPartland, who is a proud conservative, because of course he is, has fashioned a golden calf from identity politics. And I suppose that is very much going to be the future of conservatism. Once again, kiddies, don't call yourself a conservative. Jim Smith, a year or two ago, one of the Seven Sisters colleges found their women's centered leadership overtaken by an influx of trans women. I had the feeling lots of women were unhappy, but few spoke publicly. You know, I first ran into this business, what was it, close to a decade ago? Dennis Dale, one of his child had bought him some space in the alternative magazine in Seattle. I believe it's called The Stranger. I could be wrong about that. But in any event, I was reading his columns online, and they had little cutouts from the personal section, because that's where they make a lot of their money. And I know there was some sort of classification that I didn't understand. And it turned out that it was lesbians who were willing to have sex with trans women. And I thought, that's a thing now? And I found out that it is very much a thing. because when I first noticed the male to female transsexualism question, it seemed to me that a great many of these men who had become women, they were going to become lesbians because of this strange belief that lesbians have sex with anyone who asks. That, it's in the manual, as Tom Wolfe would say. So the selfish, ugly, transphobic lesbians who won't have sex with men who are misgendered at birth, wicked, wicked, wicked women. Metal Mike says, did they freeze louder with Crowder from YouTube? I don't know. I can't say that I have followed him. Isn't he always doing drag? And now whatever SoCon gains he made using Trump as a vessel will be overturned, and we will see a crowded primary full of establishment types. I don't know. That's 3 years away or more. I think it might be better if we concentrated on where we are now. It's really distressing looking at the media, political journalism. It's all this meta stuff. Who's hot, who's not, who's up, who's down. And this gives them an excuse to rely on polls and not to report anything to do with policy. Cecil Henry says the essence of bully systems are whatever idea is not prohibited is compulsory. Well, yes, I'm Thomas Fleming said that with regard to Puritanism, that whatever is bad must be prohibited and whatever is good must be made compulsory. Remember when the battle of the sexes was thinly veiled foreplay? Yeah, I suppose I do. Dan Allison says, I was born between Atlanta and Chattanooga, so I know all about how that secession thing worked the last time we tried it. Well, the way that David A. French, the champion of a true conservative and champion of a drag queen story hour, is carrying on, it appears that the South must be expelled because it's full of these wicked people called Southern evangelicals who are full of hatred. And they've expressed this hatred, of course, by voting for Trump twice. At this point, it's hard for me to care who the 2020 nominee will be. Well, yeah, there's going to be a lot of neocons because neoconservatism is back in a big way. It has no popular support, neoconservatism. Here's the secret for you. Neoconservatism has never had any popular support. And it's not a political movement. Never has been. The NRA people, they are a political movement. Anti-abortion, they are a political movement. The neocons have always been a few hundred people, newspaper columnists, and think tank seat fillers. They've never had any political power. And given that when they were first given political power in the Reagan administration, how they wrecked his second term and Iran-Contra, that was looking so rancid that there were actually questions about Reagan resigning. One would have thought they would have been exiled from the corridors of power permanently. And I began to wonder, do they have compromat on the politicians? Because I don't know. That's what comes to mind. That explanation comes to mind. Gamion says Biden's inauguration looked and felt like a funeral, didn't it? Well, the concertina wire, that is always, whenever I see barbed wire in public, I always find that enormously depressing. Of course, concertina wire is even worse. I guess I confused two Russian tennis players. Sorry about that. Don from Beyond says Florida does not have a statewide mask mandate, but various counties and towns do. If not conservatives, what should we call ourselves, says Galmian? Patriots. Patriots is very good. Metal Mike says 50,000 armed guards at the inauguration, 0 members of the public. Joe is a man of the people. Well, I'm sure they were all watching on video, although I heard that YouTube video of the inauguration was delisted because it was ratioed so hard. Yako Raipala says, I thought the whole trans thing was just extremely effeminate homosexuals. Not any longer. No, not any longer. You get a lot of autogynophiles, I believe the term is. I'll give you the Baudelaire's version of this. I'd have sex with me. Wouldn't you have sex with me? Well, yes, and of course the female to male thing, it simply came out of the blue when I heard of it for the first time. But as Abigail Schreier explains in her highly recommended book, that social media has been an absolute disaster for women, particularly young women. Okay, let's get back to it here, and let's talk about a rising star. Oh, before we get to that, in the yes, Biden. We all know him. We all love him. This is from Pam Key from Breitbart. MSNBC national affairs analyst John Heilemann said during his network's coverage of President Joe Biden's inauguration ceremony that seeing the past presidents standing with Biden was like the Avengers, sort of the Marvel superheroes back up there together. Quote, we had the insurrection 2 weeks ago. No, it wasn't an insurrection. You need the dictionary habit. Last week, we had the impeachment with the inauguration today. Amazing, huge, seismic stories that even 32 years of being in and out of Washington and covering this stuff, I'd never experienced a period like this that has been more unnerving and more unsettling. The Avengers, Marvel superheroes. This is a grown man, but another example of what Shiva Naipaul called universal mental retardation. Amanda Gorman. You'd never heard of this woman until yesterday, but now you are obliged to love her. Barack Obama tweeted, on a day for the history books, Amanda Gorman delivered a poem that was more than met the moment. Young people like her are proof that, quote, there is always light if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it, unquote. Richard Hanania responded, this is basically Hamilton all over again. Liberal elites have a desperate need for corny patriotism as long as the artists are minorities. Amanda Gorman is Lin-Manuel Miranda. Gives them the history and unifying story all humans crave, but without the whiteness they dislike. It's exceedingly patronizing. Oh, look, a black woman wrote a poem. Oh, golly, it's not like that's ever happened before. I wonder if she understands that she is being patronized. And let's get into cringe territory here. Jen Psaki, who is the spokesperson for Joe Biden, tweeted, as a human and American, I have a massive girl crush on Amanda Gorman. Why this use of the word human as opposed to what? Massive girl crush. Ooh, yes. You see that flirtation with lesbianism there? Don't you feel the frisson? But the machine has been working overtime on Amanda Gorman. She has a Wikipedia entry, and which is rather lengthy. So let's find out about this woman. She was born in 1998. She is an American poet and activist from Los Angeles. Her work focuses on issues of oppression. Here we go. Feminism, race, and marginalization, as well as the African diaspora. Marginalization. This woman has been petted for quite a long time. She is a fortunate young woman. Gorman was the first person to be named National Youth Poet Laureate. No one had even heard of this again until yesterday. She published the poetry book, The One for Whom Food Is Not Enough, in 2015. She was born in Los Angeles in 1998 and raised by her mother, a teacher named Joan Wicks, with her two siblings. She has a twin sister, Gabrielle, who is also an activist and filmmaker. She described her young self as a weird child who enjoyed reading and writing and was encouraged by her mother. Gorman has an auditory processing disorder and is hypersensitive to sound. In other words, she suffers from a form of mental illness. Auditory processing disorder. Doesn't Greta Thunberg also suffer from this? Let's see. Signs and symptoms below from Wikipedia. Talk louder than necessary. Talk softer than necessary. Have trouble remembering a list or sequence. Often need words or sentences repeated. Have poor ability to memorize information learned by listening. Interpret words too literally. Need assistance hearing clearly in noisy environments. Rely on accommodation and modification strategies. Find or request a quiet workspace away from others. Request written material when attending oral presentations. Ask for directions to be given one step at a time. Let's see. Gorman participated in speech therapy during her childhood. And according to Elida Kacharian of the Harvard Crimson, Gorman doesn't view her speech impediment as a crutch. Rather, she sees it as a gift and a strength. Well, she is dead wrong about this. This is the cult of the disabled. A speech impediment is not a gift, and it is not a strength. The story goes, apparently she cured herself of this speech impediment. So I guess she's lost that gift and strength by reading from, wait for it, Hamilton. Of course. She attended New Roads, a private school in Santa Monica. It doesn't sound very oppressed to me. As a senior, Gorman received a Milken Family Foundation college scholarship. She studied sociology at Harvard and graduated cum laude. As a member of Phi Beta Kappa, I'm really not picking up any oppressive vibes here. Gorman's art and activism focus on issues of oppression, feminism, race, and, wait for it, marginalization. She was chosen as the Youth Poet Laureate of Los Angeles in 2014. This is all very amusing to me because poetry is a dead art form and has been dead for decades. Women are lousy poets. Poetry requires concision. There are many excellent female novelists because a novel can be whatever you want it to be. Poetry is a harder discipline. She opened the literary season for the Library of Congress in 2017, and she's read her poetry on MTV. The Morgan Library and Museum acquired her poem In This Place, an American Lyric. Yes, it appears that she is being fitted for the American Pantheon. She became the first person. She won a $10,000 grant from media company OZY as part of the OZY Genius Awards. She said that she wants to run for president in 2036 and has subsequently often repeated this hope. Hillary Clinton has already endorsed her campaign. Yes, she appeared in an episode of the web series Some Good News, hosted by John Krasinski, where she had the opportunity to virtually meet Oprah Winfrey and issued a virtual commencement speech to those who could not attend physical commitments due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2020, Gorman presented Earthrise, a poem focused on the climate crisis. During the week before the inauguration, Gorman told the Washington Post book critic Ron Charles, "My hope is that my poem will represent a moment of unity for our country. With my words, I'll be able to speak to a new chapter and era for our nation." She has 2 upcoming books, a poetry collection titled The Hill We Climb, and a project for youth called Change Sings, a children's anthem. Both books are scheduled to be released in September 2021. Oh, she also has a book deal with Viking to write 2 children's picture books. I suppose there are a lot of other authors, young authors, black or white, female or male, who are grinding their teeth if they were to read all this. What makes this woman so special? So let's get to this poem, this epic poem. USA Today explains Amanda Gorman, the nation's first National Youth Poet Laureate. They keep mentioning this as if this is some sort of distinction of any merit. Made history again Wednesday as the youngest inaugural poet in U.S. history. Gorman, 22, performed an original poem titled The Hill We Climb, continuing a tradition that has included such celebrated poets as Robert Frost and Maya Angelou. Celebrated poet, Maya Angelou. Yes, Maya Angelou ended her storied career writing cards for Hallmark. Yes, she had finally found her métier. But let's get back to this poem. It includes 2 references to Lin-Manuel Miranda's musical Hamilton. Yes, it was the founding fathers were black, starting with Alexander Hamilton, who was not black. He was Scottish. The notion that he was black was a wicked and scurrilous insult from John Adams, because in those days, to be called black or to suggest that one was a mulatto was a deadly insult. But Lin-Manuel Miranda, I don't know, perhaps cynically or perhaps genuinely, seems to believe that John Adams was actually speaking seriously and not scurrilously. I see Oprah Winfrey praised this young woman to the skies. Of course, praise from Oprah Winfrey doesn't count for much after we learned just how much Oprah Winfrey loved Harvey Weinstein. Let's see. Mr. President, Dr. Biden, Madam Vice President, Mr. Emhoff, Americans in the world, when day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. And the norms and notions of what just isn't always justice. And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country in a time when a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know how to put our future first. We must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true, that even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. This is the promise to glade, the hill we climb if only we dare it, because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith, we trust for while we have our eyes on the future. History has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption we feared at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be. A country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens, but one thing is certain. If we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change, our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the west. We will rise from the winds swept north, east, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rinsed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked south. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation and every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we will step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. This is terrible stuff. Absolutely dreadful. I could mention that she does not know what the word pristine means. Very few people seem to know what the word pristine means. It does not mean good or nice to look at. It means not besmirched, as in the original. That's what pristine means. And oh yes, you got to. I guess she figured she had to give props, as the kids like to say, to herself. That a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother. That's what is known as special pleading. All of this internal rhyme, it's, I can bear it with Edgar Allan Poe. He was actually good. With this woman, Gorman, it's like Nabokov said, Lolita kind of sweeter, It's relentless in its banality. Lake rinsed. Oh, that's a good one. The endless mixed metaphors, and I suppose she is speaking to the zeitgeist when she talks about, this catastrophe. Golly, the catastrophe was on January 6th, and 2 weeks later, Biden was inaugurated president. A pretty short-lived catastrophe, was it not? Oh, did all the fires burn out in all the cities? Oh, there weren't any fires? Oh, I see. Okay, everyone went home on January 6th. With every breath from my bronze-pounded chest. That is terrible. Okay, so your chest is bronze. Well, kind of, but bronze-pounded chest? Is she referring to the heart beating in her chest? We will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. The world is always wounded. So what? And the going from wounded to wonder, enough of that. I suppose, even at the time of Robert Frost, who gave the Kennedy's inaugural poem in 1961, there were still millions of Americans who were familiar with poetry, millions of Americans who had actually committed a lot of poetry to heart. Again, at a time when no one reads poetry anymore, it's easy enough to write the most embarrassing piffle and have it praised to the skies. But again, just the condescension in this. Hikmah Warrior says she is no Rumi. More like the triumph of affirmative action, says John S. What's the word? There was a phrase that was popular some time ago. The bigotry of low expectations. Okay, so there's no way Oprah wrote this, says Cecil Henry. Nation's Poet Laureate? No, she's the Youth Laureate. I don't know Poet Laureate of the United States. I don't know. It's been a long time since there was a Poet Laureate that Americans had ever heard of, or actually people even who pay attention to literature who have recognized the names of the Poet Laureates. Let's see. Consultants in poetry. There's a whole lot of names that I recognize there. Poet Laureate consultants, special consultants in poetry. I'm just looking for a list of the okay. Oh, U.S. States Poet Laureate. Well, I'm not interested in that. I want never mind that. Never mind that. My point being is that if you go to the past, or even this list of consultants, Alan Tate, Robert Penn Warren, Carl Shapiro, Robert Lowell, Elizabeth Bishop, Conrad Aikens, William Carlos Williams, Randall Jarrell, Robert Frost, Louis Untermeyer, Howard Nemiroff, Stephen Spender, James Dickey. People actually read their poems. For decades now, poetry has been a wholly owned subsidiary of government. That poetry books are paid for by grants from federal governments, state governments, provincial governments, etc., etc. And they're published and then they get pulped because no one reads it anymore. Let's see. The mediocre and the banal shall inherit the earth, says Michael. Yeah, I can't pronounce that. Okay. Lenny Puffo wrote better poetry. Well, you see, she's obviously been influenced by rap. That yes, you have to have all of these rhymes. Yes, I like rhyming. Rhyming is excellent. It's a great unifier. But so many of the rhymes in rap music are mere placeholders. And I guess the rappers are too lazy to go back and say, ugh, that's not very good. I can find a better rhyme. No. Also because it would not be authentic to actually revise one's raps. Steve says this is the decadent phase of a culture. Professor Paul, KMG, Poetry Slam, and Free Verse Hip Hop when? Well, I'm going to be talking about poetry tomorrow on the book club, and I'm going to be discussing the South African poet Roy Campbell, a poet and translator, and I'm going to be reading a fair number of his works. Okay, so limericks, no. Actually, I remember some years ago, Michael Brennan Doherty told me that he'd recently come across some poems that he had written in high school and that he was delighted to find them. I used to write poetry in high school and I would pay for the destruction of it. I think I can only remember one line. It was a sonnet, and one of the lines was "Squawk like the blue jay, both raucous and shrill," which I thought was pretty good to you. Colin Colenso says, quoting Thomas Saz, if the dead talk to you, you are a spiritualist. If God talks to you, you are a schizophrenic. Okay, so moving on. Oh, yes, cope. Let's have some cope. From Vox Day. If they want hopium and copium, then let's give them to the black pillars good and hard by laying out one Anon's possible post-inaugural Q scenario. The book to which the Anon refers to is presumably the Department of Defense War Manual, specifically beginning with page 754. Also note drop 4524, D plus China equals 11.3, which could refer to 11.3 end of occupation and duration of Geneva Convention obligations. Like many of you, I'm in shock by today's, there's a word missing there, and then I realized why it had to happen, and that Q told us it would happen, and why this needed to happen. Q did tell us that a scare event would be needed. Well, are you scared yet? Q post 4821 and 4822 from October 7, 2020 told us about Biden being sworn in and with the countries he took bribes from then be in control of the government. Biden had to take a private jet to Washington, D.C., and it was not a government jet. Yeah, okay. So this is like these apocalyptic religions who confidently predict that the world is coming to an end on this date. And then the world doesn't come to an end, and we got the math wrong, or we misinterpreted the prophecy. The world is actually coming to an end on this new date. And then when the world does not come to an end on that new date, that's where QAnon is now. And to the extent that I'd ever paid much attention to its formal pronouncements, I am no longer going to pay any attention to them anymore, because we are in the fever swamps now. Alrighty. And, there's a picture of Joe Biden at his desk in the Oval Office wearing a mask. I suppose he wears a mask outdoors, because of course he does. And here he is wearing a mask at the Oval Office because I guess he's setting an example. Imagine being president of the United States and feeling that one must wear a mask at one's own desk. Oh, thanks, Don. Biden inherits worst job market of any modern president. Oh, yes. Of course, it was Donald Trump who conjured up COVID-19. And it was Donald Trump who went into hysterics and shut everything down and scared everyone to death. Joe unveils sweeping new COVID rules, requires mask to travel. He signs burst of virus orders, vows help is on the way. This is from the Associated Press. Let's see. Let's get into this mask business, including a requirement that Americans mask up for travel. Is this constitutional? Biden's mask order for travel applies to airports and planes, ships, intercity buses, trains, and public transportation. Oh, I see. Does the President of the United States now have plenary power over intercity buses, trains, and public transportation? I don't think so. But I can't really imagine America's cowed Supreme Court standing in his way. Oh, let's see. Claudia Conway threatens to post hours and hours of footage of Kellyanne screaming abuse. When this young woman, Claudia Conway, has her inevitable nervous breakdown, or is rushed to the hospital with a drug overdose or a suicide attempt, or starts posting nudes on OnlyFans, I'm going to blame the media, because the media thought it would be very amusing to get into a dispute between her mother and her daughter in order to make Trump look bad. Claudia Conway is obviously a very thirsty young woman, but her thirst has become gasping since she was given all this attention by our depraved media. And CNN. CNN must be in a good mood. Biden rolls out national strategy to combat COVID. I thought America was a federal system. I guess we can stop pretending that, eh? 7 Senate Democrats request ethics probe into Cruz and Hawley over Capitol riot. Perhaps we can have an ethics probe into all those who talked up the BLM riots. Oh, the president says his plan is based on science, not politics, and was developed with input from Dr. Fauci and other experts. Dr. Fauci is not an expert. He is a bureaucrat. But I suppose that's what counts. That's the best kind of expert, isn't it? Let's go to Paul Gottfried, who I've long admired for saying what he thinks. His piece on American greatness called The Mock Inauguration. Conservatives should treat the Biden-Harris administration exactly the way Democrats treated Trump's presidency, by totally dissociating themselves from any of its actions. This terrible dread word, conservative. The conservative Catholic columnist John Zimirak ends his Inauguration Day column for the Stream with this expression of profound disgust. So by all means, enjoy the mock inauguration of a corrupt Senate hack as the fruit of, I won't mention that, and fake COVID panic. But remember that now we all live in a tin pot bananas republic, and a disciplined, fanatically nationalist, resurgent Red China is smiling. The virus it shipped worldwide succeeded beyond its leaders' wildest expectations. Gottfried comments, I quote Zimirak's peroration because of the openness of his loathing for the administration that began its reign on Wednesday. Pat Buchanan, Roger Simon, Newt Gingrich, Roger Kimball, and Michael Walsh have all recently produced informative and eloquent columns underscoring the lies, deceit, and intimidation that they associate with the woke left. The conservative movement has reacted to this political and existential crisis in one of two ways, either by turning viciously on the outgoing president to accommodate hoped-for talking partners on the left, or by sounding the call for resistance, which seems the admirable position of this website. Morally and emotionally, I'm a résistant, but I think the right must face certain problems in working out best to how to resist the cultural Marxist power grab. What we are observing is not a recent development, part of a revolutionary process that began decades ago. The left moves incrementally, while the right usually reacts to the most recent crisis. The left also puts itself in a position to determine the meaning of emotive terms like equality and fairness. Leftist activists took over mass education and the culture industry without breaking a sweat. Our side allowed this power grab to go mostly unnoticed, except for a few discordant voices who failed to prevail. Well, yes. What Gottfried has done is to explain why the conservative movement needs to be eliminated. This has been going on for decades. And what did the right do? Oh, ho, ho, ho. Have you heard about this thing called political correctness? Pretty amusing. No? Oh, let's hear the latest wacky stories from the campus. Did they make any effort to stop this? Did they make any effort to stop the wholesale takeover of the culture? No, they did not. Which ends up, of course, with David A. French, noted theologian, applauding a drag queen story hour is one of the blessings of American liberty. Gottfried continues, in the battle for political and cultural control, the other side planned well, while ours, with isolated exceptions, were conflict averse or easily distracted until it was too late. The so-called conservatives, they believe in stasis. We will, I've been hearing this for my whole life. We'll give them this, and then there will be no more demands. At the same time, these people were constantly talking about the legacy of Munich. Oh, no. You see, they were giving in to Hitler from the start. And of course, Hitler was emboldened by this. No, but when it comes to culture, The position of the conservatives was, oh, let's stop making a fuss about this. This battle is lost. We'll give them this, and that will be the last of their cultural demands. No, of course, it wasn't the end. Godfrey continues, another more controversial argument I would make is that the conservatives who oppose the victory of the radicals have been in denial about the other side's long road to victory. Typically, the right focuses on the present moment, which they view separately in isolation from what went on before. But first and second wave feminism preceded and prepared the ground for third wave feminism, which the conservative movement is now decrying. Most of the leaders of the civil rights movement in the 1960s and 70s who are still around can be found in the left wing of the Democratic Party. It is foolish and dishonest to pretend that there is no connection between the politics of Martin Luther King Jr. and the present leftist views of James Clyburn and, until his recent death, John Lewis. These figures cooperated as members of the same movement, and most of the radicals of the 1970s, however just their cause may have been, went on from earlier to more advanced stages of an incremental revolution. Out of these efforts came a vast government bureaucracy to ferret out and punish discrimination as the victims included under that term continue to expand. But equally relevant, a similar process of radicalization has unfolded in Canada, Germany, England, France, Sweden, and Spain, even without the stimulus or example of the American civil rights movement. In other parts of the West, anti-colonialism and sometimes bizarre reactions to the Holocaust have fueled their own versions of cultural radicalism and accelerated a war against Judeo-Christian bourgeois moral standards. Needless to say, the left is always in a position to impose its revisionist history in view of its commanding position in both the media and educational institutions. Conservatives in Congress, yes, okay. Judeo-Christian, there's no such thing. Well, again, Judeo-Christianity could be said to have existed, say, for the 1st century AD, but after that, no. No, let's go to Angelo Codavia, and thank you to the fellow in the chat who suggested this yesterday. He writes, and this is again in American Greatness, Texas versus Pennsylvania et al. Did not deny setting rules for the 2020 election contrary to the Constitution. On December 10th, 2020, the Supreme Court discounted that. By refusing to interfere as America's ruling oligarchy serves itself, the court archived what remained of the American Republic's system of equal justice. That much is clear. Again, this word oligarchy, which we will be hearing a lot as I progress into James Burnham's The Machiavellians, the iron law of oligarchy. As the oligarchy has arisen and consolidated its power in the United States, what has been the reaction from the conservatives? It's not oppression if private companies do it. Oh, even monopoly or quasi-monopoly, private companies? No. Well, that's not what the Supreme Court held in 1946. And of course, that great Republican president, Teddy Roosevelt, was known as a trust buster. But the conservatives do not believe that small is beautiful. They believe that enormous is beautiful, and that which is enormous must become ever more enormous and powerful. Codavia writes, corporations and the government itself require employees to attend meetings personally to acknowledge their guilt, for being white. They solicit mutual accusations while violent felons are released from prison. Anyone may be fired or otherwise have his life wrecked for questioning government corporate sentiment. Today's rulers don't try to convince, they demand obedience and they punish. Russians and East Germans under communist Leonid Brezhnev and Erich Honecker in the 1970s lived under less ruling class pressure than do today's Americans. And the rulers were smart enough not to insult them, their country, or the race. It seems to me that one would have got far more anti-German prejudice and agitprop in West Germany in the 60s, 70s, and 80s than in East Germany. In 2015, Americans could still believe they lived in a republic in which life's rules flow from the people through their representatives. In 2021, a class of rulers draws their right to rule from self-declared experts, claims of infallibility that dwarf a Baroque king's pretensions. Oligarchy had long been growing within Americans' republican forms. By the 21st century's first decade, little but formality was left of the American Republic. In 1942, Joseph Schumpeter's Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy described the logic by which government and big business tend to coalesce into socialism in theory, oligarchy in practice. But by then, the logic had already imposed itself on the Western world. Italy's 1926 Law of Corporations, Fascism's charter, inaugurated not so much the regulation of business by government as the coalescence of the twain. Over the ensuing decade, it was more or less copied throughout the West. President Eisenhower, who had come to understand large organizations that feed on government power and dispense vast private benefits, was not shy in warning about the danger they posed to the public. His warning about the military-industrial complex that he knew so well is often misunderstood as a mere caution against militarism, but Ike was making a broader point. Amalgams of public and private power tend to prioritize their corporate interests over the country. This is why Eisenhower cautioned against the power of government-funded expertise. The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded, he said, because public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite. Government money can accredit a self-regarding elite because a government contract becomes virtually a substitute for intellectual curiosity, in Eisenhower's words. Government experts can end up substituting their power for truth, which is, of course, exactly what has happened. This is a very long essay, many thousands of words, but let's go to its conclusion. As American primary and secondary education's dysfunction became painfully apparent, parents of all races have fled the public schools as fast as they could. Businesses have been fleeing the Rust Belt for the Sun Belt for generations. When Democratic governors and mayors used COVID to make life difficult in their jurisdictions, people moved out of them. When Twitter's censorship of conservatives became undeniable, Parler added customers by the hundreds of thousands each day. Facebook and Twitter stock lost $50 billion in a week. Much more separation follows from the American people's diverging cultures. As conservative America sorts itself out from the oligarchy's social bases, it may be able to restore something like what had existed under the Republic. Effectively, two regimes would have to learn to coexist within our present boundaries. But that may be the best, freest arrangement possible now for the United States. I've been struck for a long time that when one looks at the birth of what used to be called the New Right and is now called the conservative movement, and I'm talking about Russell Kirk's book, The Conservative Mind, the founding of National Review in, I believe, 1955, that there was no conservative movement to speak of, and to identify oneself as right-wing was dangerous at the time. On the other hand, America was to a very large extent still a conservative country in its people, in its behavior. Now, of course, and for decades, the Conservatism Inc., as they call it, has provided employment to a fair number of people and speaks supposedly for tens of millions of people. But conservatism in America has disappeared. So we see the rise of a movement designed to protect something. It didn't protect anything, and yet it flourished as it failed. Isn't that so often the way? Let's see what William Briggs has to say. It's always nice to hear from him. Yes, I like this. This is from the Washington Post Opinions. When talking about Biden, people invariably speak about the depth of his empathy and his experience. Was it Jonathan Capehart writes? They do. Oh, yes, Americans are constantly speaking about the depth of Joe Biden's empathy and his experience. You'd have to be a professional liar to write something like that. But what no one ever talks about, Capehart continues, is Biden's joy, the same joy I witnessed that warm June day. Briggs comments, science has just discovered a powerful new emetic, Biden journalism. Briggs says, a bit more than 4 years ago, I wrote, Trump is a respite, not a solution, a slight lessening in the downward slope on which our culture is sliding into oblivion. Trump was not Putin, and it is now business as usual, though accelerated. Trump implementing policies that would have been classified progressive 20 years ago, except he only bombed Syria once and tried with little success drawing down troops elsewhere, drove the debased mad, mostly for the reason he affronted their fine sensibilities. That has to be the best thing Trump did, send the debased over the edge. He was responsible for a massive surplus of splenetic fevers, seizures, angina, conniption fits, and yes, sour indigestions. That part was glorious. The rest wasn't so good. That is, not nearly so good as we would have preferred. How about when why talk about that now? It's all in the past. Today is the current year. Onward. The debased are out for revenge. They won't have Trump to chase with lit torch and pitchfork, but they'll go after those who supported him. I have talked to several people the past few days, and the stories of persecutions from minor to significant are building. The question will be how long before the metaphorical, for now, bloodlust is sated, or are we in a strong swirl segment of the leftist purity spiral? I don't have answers for that. Yes, and we shall see. They're already calling for the heads of senators. Briefly, I want to comment on an article that appeared in the Jewish News Syndicate by Jonathan S. Tobin, who is the editor-in-chief of the Jewish News Syndicate. And it's called, "It's Time to Stop Counting Jews in the Cabinet." He begins, Jewish Democrats are celebrating this weekend with good reason. Their party is about to take power in Washington. This was written January the 19th. And end the presidency of the man they all love to hate, President Donald Trump. But adding a certain frisson of pride to their touchdown dances is a number of cabinet members and other officials and personalities within the first and second families who are Jewish. It's an impressive tally. Social media is awash with posts with lists of the Jewish cabinet secretaries and undersecretaries, as well as the Jewish connections of President Joe Biden. Say what? And Vice President Kamala Harris. I saw she's being referred to as Mamala Harris. Now, quite seriously, Mamala Harris is not a mama. She is barren by choice. But perhaps I'm looking at this question of motherhood too narrowly. Tobin continues, when placed in the broad sweep of the nation's history, it's an important statement about the acceptance and accomplishments of American Jewry. A century ago, or even for several decades afterwards, such a number would have been inconceivable. 9 Jews are in the new Senate, including the new majority leader, and 25 in the House of Representatives, making up more than 6% of the total Congress. That's more than triple the percentage of Jews in the general population. There are also 2 Jews out of 9 justices on the U.S. Supreme Court. Seen in that light, a Jewish Secretary of State, Treasury Secretary, Homeland Security Secretary, Attorney General, and Director of National Intelligence, to name a few high-level positions, are merely a reflection of the preponderance of Jews who have risen to the top of just about every sector of American society. Yes, that's a curious headline for this, because Tobin is arguing that, let's not count, and he pretty much gives us a list. My advice, for what it's worth, is that it is not a good idea for market-dominant or political-dominant minorities to boast of their power and influence, because this engenders envy and hatred. Best to keep stum is my advice. I'm going to be talking about James Byrne, the Machiavellians, very shortly. Oh, yes. Seth Rogen is duking it out with Ted Cruz. Whenever I see Seth Rogen, I think, is there a more punchable face in the world? The Germans have a word which is very complicated and which I have attempted to memorize quite a few times, meaning punchable face. I'm sure someone in the chat will come up with it. Fascist, white supremacist, etc., etc. What Seth Rogen knows about fascism, he couldn't fill a matchbook cover with it. This is a man who grew up in Vancouver, as it turns out. And he graduated from Point Grey High School, a couple of blocks from where I was living at the time. He makes stoner comedies and movies about vegetables having sex with each other and the like. He famously called American Sniper, what do you call it, Nazi propaganda or something like that. He'd obviously never seen the movie because it's not a celebration of professional killers, quite the opposite. But Seth Rogen is not only an ignorant man, he is a stupid man. Oh, Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, shares stay-at-home message in 22 languages. Languages included French, German, Mandarin, Cantonese, Italian, Punjabi, and Arabic, to name a few. Yes, this is the new Canada. We are going to build a multicultural, multilingual Tower of Babel, and this time it is going to truly rival God. Yes, that is the Canadian ethos. Let's go to lockdown skeptics. Boris Johnson in no rush to lift restrictions. Can this fellow get a haircut or buy a hairbrush or put something on it? Because he doesn't look much different from a tramp, actually. And apparently proof of both jabs of the virus are going to be required soon in Britain to, well, travel or perhaps do anything, to shop at certain places. And this lockdown, this time we really mean it. Oh, and Scotland is being pushed towards a zero COVID strategy, which means that people are going to have to socially distance and wear masks and all the rest of it forever. As I mentioned in this space yesterday, the World Health Organization updates guidance on PCR tests, recommends retesting to confirm positives. How about that? And lockdown skeptics, in the person of Will Jones, enjoys some Schadenfreude. There's a German word I do know how to pronounce. Enjoys some Schadenfreude. For now, skeptics have been ridiculed for questioning the accuracy of the PCR test, referring to the risk of false positives when prevalence is low, and urging the government to carry out confirmatory second tests on those that test positive. This updated advice from the WHO is a vindication of our position. We look forward to governments and health authorities bringing their practices into line with it. And Lord Sumption, who made a controversial comment about the value of life, yes, he has become a hate figure. Well, how easy is that? You simply lie about what people said. Obviously, in any situation, particularly one with rationed health care, such as the National Health Service, decisions are made about who is to get health care before others. And, obviously, when you're looking at someone who's 90 years old as opposed to someone who's, say, 10 or 20 or 30, one would probably not risk, heroic interventions to save a 90-year-old as opposed to someone who was 10, 20, or 30. This is not a surprise. But we are so allergic to the truth now that it's just ever so easy to start squealing about lack of empathy, as if empathy is a common situation. Empathy is exceedingly rare. Empathy is the sort of thing that artists best provide, because it is exceedingly difficult for any person to put himself in someone else's shoes. Of course, most people, they conflate empathy with sympathy. Let's have a look at Alex Berenson. Yes, I keep forgetting that function no longer works for some reason. But we'll have him up within 5 seconds. And there we are. So, yes, Gretchen Whitmer. Mask, mask, mask. We're ready. 3 women with masks outdoors. Alex Berenson responds, so let me make sure I have this right. People from all over the country can go to DC by the thousands to celebrate an event that's important to them, but visiting families for the holidays was immoral and wrong. Rules are for thee, not for Gretchy. Here's a tweet from Open FCPS. The FEA president speaking before the board just confirmed she opposes returning to school next fall 5 days a week. She said FCPS should stay in hybrid until kids are vaccinated. We note most experts expect this to happen in 2022 or not at all. Berenson comments, when will school districts start firing teachers en masse? Because it's increasingly clear that's going to be the only way to break this insanity. Well, I'm going to make by now obligatory comment on this. If it turns out that we need far, far, far fewer teachers than we had been previously assured, why don't we simply cull the number of teachers by 1/3, 1/2, 2/3, or whatever? Similarly, with regard to the civil service, if it turns out that half or so of civil servants have still not returned to their desks, this suggests to me that half of these jobs are excess. So why aren't they fired? So let's move on now to James Burnham. And he's talking in the Machiavellians about Machiavelli's method. Machiavelli's method is the method of science applied to politics. Machiavelli delineates with sufficient clarity the field of politics. Machiavelli assembles, and with some measure of system, a large number of facts drawn from his reading in the historical works available to him, from what others prominent in the politics of his own day have told him, and from what he has himself observed during his own active political career. In any field except politics, such a procedure might seem too obvious to deserve comment. But in writing about politics, the usual approach is that of Dante, stating not with observed facts, but with supposed general principles governing the nature of man, society, and the universe. I'll break in to say that one of these supposed general principles is human rights. This is a fanciful construction. Human rights, they exist, guaranteed by whom? And who decides what are these human rights? How are these human rights enforced? But of course, from whence do they derive? There's no answer to that question. In writing about politics, yes, the usual approach is Dante's. Conclusions are reached by deductions from the principles. If facts disagree, so much the worse for the facts. For Machiavelli, the facts come first. Questions are answered by appeal to them as final court. If they disclose that successful rulers lie frequently and break treaties, then such a generalization takes precedence over an opposite law drawn from some metaphysical dogma which states that all men have an innate love of the truth, or from an optimistic, unexamined hope that in the long run truth triumphs over lies. If the facts show that a government is more securely based on the confidence and support of the people than on the building of fortresses, then that must answer the argument over the merits of fortresses widely debated in Machiavelli's time, even though many rulers doubtless preferred to believe otherwise. Florence, with plenty of money and little stomach for fighting, wanted to believe that it could maintain itself by hiring mercenary troops. But the facts, again, proved that only the citizenry and arms could really be trusted. For Machiavelli, when the facts decide, it is the principles that must be scrapped. And Machiavelli is always attempting to correlate sets of facts into generalizations or laws. He is interested not alone or primarily in the individual, unique political event, but in laws relating. He does not suppose that it will be possible for him to formulate at that primitive stage of political science universal laws covering the whole realm of politics, but he evidently thinks it is possible to state approximate generalizations about many kinds of political event. He's always wondering whether something recorded in Livy or Thucydides or observed in his own time is an exception, a unique, peculiar action, or whether it may not be understood as an instance of a general pattern of political behavior. In the vigorous days of the Republic, the Romans elected consuls for a year only. Even if the consuls were leading armies in the field, they were recalled and replaced at the end of their year. This was often a military inconvenience, threatening at times military defeat or at least the prolongation of a campaign. But was it wise from the point of view of the preservation of the liberty of the Republic? Machiavelli finds that not only in that connection, but as a general rule, it was not only wise, but essential that the liberty of a republic is secure only when its officials are elected for short, definite terms, which are never prolonged. How should states proceed if they are to prosper in the treatment of enemies, internal or external, once the enemies have been defeated? Machiavelli is not interested in the single instance. By examples from the Roman and Greek and Carthaginian and Italian and French history, he shows that the middle way in such cases almost invariably works out badly, that the enemy should be either completely crushed or completely conciliated, that a mixture of the two simply guarantees both the continuation of a cause for resentment and revenge and the possibility for later translating these into action. I have seen this in my own life. I have seen after Stockwell Day became the leader of the Canadian Alliance, he attempted to conciliate the forces within that party that remained loyal to their previous leader, Preston Manning. Stockwell Day and his brains trust were exceedingly naive, because from the very beginning, Manning's people were plotting against Day, seeking to overthrow him and return to power, and spreading endless, scurrilous stories and rumors about Day to reporters such as myself. And it might be further remarked that Machiavelli ordinarily tests his generalizations by examples drawn from several different periods of history. The reason for this is to guard against mistaking a type of behavior characteristic of some particular period for a more general historical law. This striving toward a more embracing political science is most evident in the discourses, where he customarily links references to Roman and Greek history with references to Italian and European history, comparatively close to his own time. Finally, though this is not strictly part of the logic of scientific method, we feel everywhere in Machiavelli, in every line and chapter, an intense and dominant passion for the truth, whatever other interests and goals he may have. To this, all the rest are, if need be, subordinated. No prejudice, no weighty tradition, no authority, no emotional twist is enough to lead him to temper his inquiry into the truth, so far as he can discover it. If we remember the established attitudes of his times, their provincial narrowness, their lack of scholarship and research in a critical sense, this passion for truth is wonderfully revealed, I think, in the sane, controlled, and balanced preface to the second book of the Discourses on Livy. Quote, "It is the common practice of mankind to commend the ancient and condemn the present times, but in my judgment, not always with reason. For so studiously are they devoted to things of antiquity that they do not only admire what is transmitted by old authors, but applaud and cry up when they are old the passages and occurrences in their youth. But my opinion is this is their way of computation in many ways is false, and that upon several accounts. First, because of such very ancient things we can have no absolute knowledge, for most commonly in the narrative of affairs what is infamous or ill done is pretermitted in silence, whilst what is well done and honorable is related with all the arts and amplifications of rhetoric. For so much are historians accustomed to attribute to the fortune of the conqueror that to increase his praise, they do not only expiate upon his conduct and exploits, but they do likewise so magnify and illustrate the very actions of the enemy that they who come after, beholding things at a great distance, have reason to admire those times and those men, and by consequence to love them. To which it may be added that the desires of mankind are immense and insatiable, that naturally we are covetous of everything, whereas fortune allows us but little. That from thence it happens that no man is contented, every man despises what he is already possessed of, commends what is past, condemns what is present, and longs for what is to come, though induced by no reasonable occasion. Things being thus, I cannot resolve myself whether ever I may not be of that number, but who in these my discourses have so highly magnified the old times and exploits of the Romans to the diminution of our own." Burnham concludes this chapter. In general summary of Machiavelli's method, we may recall the distinction between formal and real meaning, which I defined in analyzing De Monarchia. It is a characteristic of Machiavelli's writing, as of all scientific discourse, that this distinction is inapplicable. Formal meaning and real meaning are one. There is no hidden meaning, no undisclosed purpose. This is why, where Machiavelli is wrong, it is easy to correct him, and why he cannot deceive us. Okay, I'm going to go to the book club now, but first let's look at the chat. Octopus Knight says, is there any important distinction between human rights and natural rights? That is a complicated subject. Perhaps I'll address that later. I don't think that I believe in natural rights. I believe in natural law. But, when God was exiled from politics, that left a huge void, which, of course, was filled, and not filled well. Okay, don't make the black kids angry, says Dionysius. Gretchen is little greater, says Hikmah Warrior. Schadenfreude, yes, Schadenfreude means taking pleasure in the pain of others. Oh, yes, here it is. And it's a hard one. Germans are very fond of compound nouns. And when I say compound nouns, I mean multiple things run together. But this word, meaning punchable face, and hang on here, I have to increase the size of this so I can read it. It's backpfeifengesicht. Backpfeifengesicht. There we go. You can see why I'd have to work on that a little more. Okay. Does Kevin have any theory why so many Canadian comics rise to the top in the U.S.? Says Glib Medley. There are several documentaries by Canadians about this. Here's my hypothesis. It is the close outsider. Canada is not the United States, but Canadians resemble Americans in many respects, not least their origins and their original demographic makeup. Furthermore, Canadians have been exposed to American culture. One might say, enveloped or drowned. It's different now because there is little that separates Americans and Canadians, and not like there used to be. Even in my boyhood, Canadian culture was much more dominated by British sources. If you look at bestseller lists from the 1960s or even the 1970s, you see the top-selling books are typically British, both fiction and nonfiction. That is to say that Canadians know a lot about Americans, but they are not Americans. And it's that distance that allows them to make observations, which Americans would not be able to do because they're too close to the subject. That is, they're too close to themselves. But Seth Rogen was actually born in Los Angeles, I believe. He came here as a baby, spent the next 18 years in Vancouver, and then after he graduated from high school, went straight back to Los Angeles. It was once the case that talented Canadians would seek a career in Canada before they went to the United States or before they went to Britain. And there's the list of famous examples that you all know of. William Shatner and Lorne Greene and Christopher Plummer, and I could go on and on and on. I mean, music, Neil Young is another one. But now they just go straight to the United States because there is nothing culturally worthwhile that is produced in Canada any longer. It's a bold statement, perhaps a hyperbolic one, but I stand by it. Okay, let's move on to our movie today. And it's the first movie of a fellow called Jake Kasdan. And Jake Kasdan was born into the business. His father is Lawrence Kasdan, who's made a lot of well-known and successful movies, written or directed The Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, The Force Awakens, Indiana Raiders of the Lost Ark, Body Heat, The Big Chill, The Accidental Tourist. This movie Zero Heat, which came out in 1998, is Jake Kasdan's first movie. He directed it, wrote it, and produced it. So he was 24 years old when it came out, and quite an auspicious debut. His next film, Orange County, let's say I am not very fond of it because it is written by Mike White, who I consider to be a disgusting person. Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story. There's some funny bits in it. There's too much to have one person in the music business is going to be both Brian Wilson and Johnny Cash. No, it's too much. And I found a kind of level of contempt there for the people being parodied. Bad Teacher, Sex Tape, Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, Jumanji, The Next Level. Yeah. Imagine being a talented filmmaker and, oh, yeah, your next film's going to be Jumanji, the Jumanji reboot. And then the next one. Yeah. This happens so often. It's just so depressing because people of talent and originality, they're crushed. They're crushed by Hollywood. Another example is the director Matt Reeves, who I think is tremendously talented. He made two of my favorite movies of recent years, Cloverfield and Let Me In. And he went from that to Dawn of the Planet of the Apes and War for the Planet of the Apes. Yep, it's only tentpole films for you, Matt. And what's he working on now? The Batman. Because apparently we have just not had enough Batman films. Zero Effect stars Bill Pullman, Ben Stiller, Kim Dickens, and Ryan O'Neal. Angela Featherstone is in it in a minor role. Just Ben Stiller's fiance. You might remember her from Seinfeld, when Seinfeld hired a maid, and it turned out that he was sleeping with her, and then she stopped doing the maid work. A kind of disguised prostitution. Jerry was scandalized by the notion. Oh, it's very sophisticated, he said. She's a very attractive woman, as is Kim Dickens. She's exceedingly attractive, especially in this film. I suppose that Verhoeven film, Hollow Man, was supposed to make her a star. It made a lot of money, but it did not succeed in making her a star. Of course, Ryan O'Neal was once Hollywood's golden boy, and he is in Barry Lyndon. I suppose he's more famous now for all the stuff in the gossip columns about him. I suppose the shorter version is that he's a horrible person, and he plays a horrible person in this film. It's about a private eye named Daryl Zero. And he's clearly, to a large extent, based on Sherlock Holmes, that he solves crimes with his mind. Of course, in the recent Sherlock Holmes films, I recall seeing the trailer for one of them and saying, silly me, I thought Sherlock Holmes solved crimes with his mind, but now he solves crimes now apparently with his fists and weapons. Daryl Zero is let's say he's very successful in his chosen field of private detection, but not successful at all in his personal life. At the beginning of the film, we are given a lot of exposition about him, about his genius as a private detector, about the amazing cases that he cracked in often incredibly short periods of time. This is rather an excuse for Ben Stiller to explain to a friend how much he hates his job. Ben Stiller, he doesn't really have much range, and he pretty much plays a jerk in every movie that he is in. He seems to be very keen to show off how muscly he is, which I find rather odd. Bill Pullman, who plays Daryl Zero, on the contrary, has a considerable range. Certainly, he plays a weirdo in Zero Effect, but he plays a weirdo in Ruthless People, and you wouldn't recognize him. You seriously wouldn't recognize him. Of course, he plays he's very amusing in Spaceballs, and he plays nice guy role in Sleepless in Seattle. I guess, let's see, nice guys finish last. I was quite impressed with him in the Cameron Crowe movie that he was in, Singles, where he played a plastic surgeon. Apparently, the original role was a much bigger one, and I would have preferred to see the original cut of him with the much bigger role, because he's quite an attractive character in it. We have some comedy at the beginning, where we see how elaborate are the precautions, all of the locks that Ben Stiller must open, all of the, there's a keypad as well, and a special elevator that goes solely to Daryl Zero's penthouse, where we learn that he is a slob and a drug addict who seems to live on amphetamines. And he styles himself a musician, which involves really thwacking away at a 6-string acoustic guitar and wailing dreadful lyrics. Of course, he's the type of a boss who must be praised for this sort of thing. We learn from the very beginning that Steve Arlo, Ben Stiller's character, who is Zero's factotum, he is engaged to the lovely Angela Featherstone, and he wants out. But he understands that Daryl Zero is, given that he doesn't seem to know anyone else in the world, is exceedingly dependent on Steve Arlo. And it's one of those situations, this comes up a lot, where an employee is treated rudely by his boss. On the other hand, he comes to think, he wouldn't be able to do it without me. I'm ever so important. Arlo is good at his job. No question about it. We are introduced to Ryan O'Neal as a old money rich man called Gregory Stark, and this movie is set in Portland. I suppose there's not very many movies set in Portland, and I really like the location photography in this film. So, Gregory Stark has lost his key to a safe deposit box, and there's a lot of wrong footing in this film. It turns out that it is a remarkably simple story. It's a remarkably direct story. One could say, to steal the line from Red Letter Media, that it's all about family. And it actually is all about family, although as I say, there are a lot of false trails. So there's something in the safe deposit box, and Gregory Stark doesn't want to say what it is. He's also being blackmailed. He doesn't know by whom, and he doesn't know why. Of course, one gets the impression right from the beginning with Gregory Stark that there's a lot of blackmailable material in his life. So Daryl Zero is a master of disguise. And it's funny, watching this film, I'm reminded of something about movies that few people in the movie business seem to understand, but it's such a powerful technique. You can make a movie about science, or a television show about science. You don't need to know the science. You can simply make it up, so long as it is internally consistent, and that's all that it takes. I'm reminded of the hilarious British TV series by Robert Popper and Peter Serafinovich called Look Around You, which is about science. All of the science in it is completely phony, made up, but it doesn't matter. Similarly, in Zero Effect, we hear from Daryl Zero all of these supposed laws of detection and personality. They're actually just pretty much made up. And all of the detail regarding bed sizes and room sizes and code regarding heating apparatus and all the like, it's all made up, but it doesn't matter. So Daryl Zero goes to Portland, and he insinuates himself anonymously with Stark, and he realizes that Stark is an absolutely terrified man. And clearly he is on the verge of being a dangerous man, lethally dangerous, because he has simply come to the end of his tether. And the movie is sort of a race against time. That is to say, there's all the secrets going to be discovered before Ryan O'Neal starts killing people. We learn right from the very beginning that he has a thing for redheads. Lots of men like redheads, but in the case of Gregory Stark, this is especially important. And he is Daryl Zero. It doesn't take long for him to discover who the blackmailer is, a young, very attractive woman who's an EMT, and her name is Gloria Sullivan. Now, it's not made explicit in the movie, but it seems likely that Daryl Zero, who is in his 30s, is probably a virgin, that he knows all about psychology, but as far as women go, he knows very little. And there is something about Gloria Sullivan that he finds irresistible. It is part of Daryl Zero's code that one cannot become emotionally involved in a case. He says, I always say that the essence of my work relies fundamentally on two basic principles: objectivity and observation, or the two obs, as I call them. My work relies on my ability to remain absolutely, purely objective, detached. I have mastered the fine art of detachment, and while it comes at some cost, this supreme objectivity is what makes me, I dare say, the greatest observer the world has ever known. He's not a modest man. Furthermore, he says, passion is the enemy of precision. Forget the misnomer crime of passion. All crime is passionate. It's passion that moves the criminal to act, to disrupt the static inertia of morality. The client's passion for this dead woman had facilitated his downfall, and the blackmailer's passion will facilitate hers. When you live with no passion at all, other people's passion comes into glaring relief. And you can see a man as talented with words as Jake Kasdan being reduced to Jumanji movies, why this irritates me so. So we have another, race against time going on, because we see that Daryl Zero's, his objectivity is being chipped away at by Gloria Sullivan. Now, he wants to find out why she would be blackmailing Gregory Stark, and it is not clear. She is not who she says she is. And as he gets closer to solving that enigma, the risk that his lack of objectivity is going to lead to, well, not just him not solving the case, but to disaster all around, constantly looms. We have the traditional meet cute, as they say, between Gloria Sullivan and Daryl Zero. And of course, the audience is rooting for them to get together. Well, which they do, physically. I could have done without the Nick Cave song in that scene. I guess this is a real 90s movie in terms of music. We've got Elvis Costello and Nick Cave and Mary Lou Lord and Brendan Benson, Jamiroquai. Pretty good soundtrack. And good music by the ever-reliable Stuart Copeland. So we find out that Gloria Sullivan's life, in fact, how she came to be, is a most remarkable story. And we see that the kind of blackmail that she is engaged in is the most dangerous kind of blackmail, because it arises from, well, passion, from a personal passion. And this movie deals with cruelty, but it also deals with kindness as well. There are several examples in this film, including a crucial one near the end of the film, where people act with kindness in situations where it would not be expected. As far as the disinterest goes, the objectivity, I can say that Daryl Zero, that he remains devoted to his clients even when they are not worthy of him, as it were. He's been given a job, and he means to do it the right way. And the fact that, and a lot of movies deal with so-called ethical questions. This one really does. And it really has some interesting things to say, both about ethics and morality, and how far duty and loyalty can be taken. Again, the excellent dialogue. When you spend enough time around the chemistry of desperation, you come to recognize the smell. One desperate element is combustible, more than one desperate element is lethal. And again, this applies to Gloria Sullivan and Gregory Stark. I should point out that Bill Pullman, it's a rather remarkable performance in this movie, because he does play excellently, the master of disguise, also, the world's greatest thinker in terms of private detection, but also he plays a character who is often out of control and so outrageously obnoxious that one wonders why he wasn't murdered years before. I suppose that rather explains why he lives as a hermit and deals only through Steve Arlo, and why he does no negotiating. He lists his terms, and that's that. And if you don't want to accept the terms, that's an end of it. I really like this movie, and it was a real surprise to me when I saw it, because there are so many ways in which this film could have been hackneyed. I particularly like the ending in this respect, that it's continually surprising. All of the acting is good. The script is tremendous, as is the direction. And it's often difficult to show, quirky or obnoxious characters without becoming cutesy with them, and to, ignore their glaring faults. This movie does not ignore the glaring faults of its characters, but still makes one sympathize with them. I very highly recommend Zero Effect. So let's have a final look at the chat. Okay. Ogan's Iron said there are limits to making up science. It can be done well, as in some hard SF novels I've read can also be done very badly. Made up science is like bad special effects or simply CGI. Or how about the science in the Profilers shows? Oh, all crimes are solved in the lab. No, not even close. Not even close. John Oliver has a more punchable face, says Darioman. John Oliver, let's see. He was on Community in quite a few episodes, and I thought that he was very good in that. He played a contemptible character, but I suppose he's good at playing a contemptible character. Do you think you can start including the books and movies you talk about in the show description? I haven't really been doing that, show descriptions. Perhaps I've misunderstood. Yes, Half Galician says they are posted on his Twitter. Yes, before the show, before I do the show, I don't know, 15, half an hour, 2 hours before, I list the topics I'm going to be discussing. And on Theater Thursday, and on the book club, I list the book. And starting, after tomorrow's show, I will have the upcoming list for Music Monday. My pinned tweet is always what's coming up culture-wise on the show. So you can find out weeks ahead what I'm going to be talking about. KMG, did you like The Big Chill? No, I very much did not like The Big Chill. These boomer celebrations of their superiority. Ugh. No, it's just, I just found that movie choking. No, it's just unbearable. And of course, the boomers all just went nuts about it. The critics and the people who went to see it. Yeah, no, that would be on the list of movies. I quite like some things that Lawrence Kasdan has done. He made a movie that was set in a small movie. It didn't get much attention. It was set in Tacoma, Washington, and of course, there's not very many movies set in Tacoma, Washington. It came out in 1990. It was called I Love You to Death, which is a exceedingly funny movie about marriage and about murder. Kevin Kline is very amusing in it. Joan Plowright as Tracy Ullman's mother, they're supposed to be Croatian, is hilarious. And William Hurt and Keanu Reeves are the two stupidest, most hilarious, drugged out contract killers that you will ever see. Okay, George Harrison supported the Natural Law Party in England. The Natural Law Party was associated with which religious cult? Indian religious cult. They spent a lot of money in Canada and made inroads in Canada as well. Okay, Kevin Kline married a gorgeous actress, the one with the famous swimming pool scene at Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Anyway, that's the show for today. On the book club tomorrow, as previously mentioned, I'll be discussing the life and times and poetry of Roy Campbell. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you'd like to show any part of it, I would appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which would be very much appreciated by me now, I'd like to get out of here and find a permanent place to live, or as permanent as things are these days. My PayPal account is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, you can send a donation to this live stream via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I shall leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear listeners and viewers, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.